Does it get to the point where, I don't think this is actually an issue for them, but does it? And they were saying that there's no sign at all that operators are going, we don't want to deal with Ericsson anymore because of what it's done in Iraq. But that's the concern, that maybe companies start to back off. The thing that they've got in their favour is there's not a lot of other choices, are there? And it's not like the other ones are all sort of covered in, they're not all smelling of roses kind of thing.
Well, indeed. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast, a good old vanilla one from the studio as opposed to from the floor of Mobile Congress in Barcelona. That seems like a lifetime ago now.
Yeah.
And so it's good to be back. It was, as ever, burnt a candle at both ends when I was there.
And you found out about your late Tuesday night.
Yeah, my Tuesday night was at 6 a.m. finish. Thanks to Julia, my mate Julia. Shout out to her. Thanks for leading me astray there. Julia and Hannah. They said, we're out clubbing. I was like, all right. That was weird, actually. I went to this club and it was like on Barceloneta. It was on the beachy bit, and it was just full of young, rich people. And so as you can imagine,
you fitted right in.
I fitted in really well. I was wearing like a Slayer t-shirt or something. And they're all sitting there wearing like £1,000 tops. And it's just like, what is this? What is this thing that's just shambled into the club? But yeah, so that didn't get much kit then, and then did the pod, and then Wednesday night was a 4 a.m. finish. So Thursday.
Hell. I can't believe that you're out that late. I had 3, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock night finishes, I think, and that was enough for me. I think Wednesday I was out till 3.
Right. Yeah, well, we had the BT thing, didn't we?
No, it's Tuesday.
Oh, it's Tuesday. Oh, yeah, Wednesday. Yeah, we all stayed the distance at that gaff, didn't we, more or less?
Yeah, you were still there when I left there.
Okay, right. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, you're knackered when you turn up, and then if you have a few beers, have a few chats, and you perk up, don't you? Or maybe it's just me. But yes, it took me the whole weekend of fairly concerted kipping to feel normal again. But here I am, back on the beers, go on. Yeah. As is Iain.
I didn't have enough yesterday.
Yeah, well, we had a few. We'll probably touch on that, but yeah, we were out yesterday
just with 6 pints
with friend of the pod, the lovely Elena, who apparently just cracks up whenever we mention her diet G&Ts that were just sitting around and we never touch them.
They're not in the fridge. Yeah,
they're just in that bag.
They will be drunk.
They're like emergency booze.
Yeah.
Once we've got through the sort of cleaning materials.
That's the auxiliary battery, that is.
Yeah. It's the diesel generator of getting pissed. So we were out yesterday, and Iain and I stayed out for a couple more because that's what we do.
It wasn't late though, was it? At least
it wasn't too late, no. Anyway, so we're going to, and Iain, the last pod, if you're a regular listener, you'll note that Iain wasn't on it for the first time in forever. So we haven't got to hear like Ian's recollections from Mobile Congress. So I think we'll start on that and just do a more. It's so different doing a pod like on location like that, and then having those sort of rotating people, not over my normal sort of podcast. It's just different. It's a little bit harder to keep the conversational flow going. So I think it's worth another little look at Mobile Congress, especially as it all seemed to go well, and that's worth reflecting on again as well. And then we're going to move on to a big story that was rumbling on through Mobile World Congress, but not necessarily about the show. And this week, it's one of our most read stories is Ericsson getting in the shit for apparently keeping certain things quiet about its dealings in Iraq, and that's led to a sort of domino effect of other aggro for them and for the CEO personally. So we got to reflect on that, and then what we can't do as things are right now is overlook the elephant in the room that is Ukraine. Obviously, we're going to try and focus mainly on the telecoms and the business side of it, but it needs to be acknowledged. In fact, Elena was saying yesterday, I'm not going to name the podcast, but she was saying yesterday that there's another podcast she listened to where they didn't cover Ukraine. Apparently, loads of people freaked out and I gave them a hard time.
Quite a prominent tech platform.
Yeah, quite a prominent tech podcast. Personally, I'll talk about what I want. If I don't want to talk about Ukraine, I won't. And people can bitch and moan all they want.
People should feel they have to talk about Ukraine.
No,
there is quite an interesting telecom angle there, I think.
So. There is, and it's there. But I completely respect anyone's right to decide not to talk about it, whether or not it's because they don't fancy dealing with delicate subject matter, which I have some sympathy for, or it's because they think there's other shit that's more relevant to their theme. It's their prerogative, so everyone just back off. But if you want to hassle me about anything I do, then bring it on. I mean, I actively like the aggro, if I'm honest. So that's all good fun.
Yeah, we know that.
So yes, and that's that really. But everything's good. You feeling like you feeling a bit of after effect of having a couple yesterday, aren't you?
A little bit. Not as bad as I thought I would.
Right. Okay.
I did go for a run this morning.
Well done. And you're having a beer, so
Yeah.
it's all good.
Sometimes you can sort of nip the hangover in the bud if you get up early and go out, I find.
Yes, or if you stay in bed till it goes away. That's the other side of that.
Yeah. Then it's worse. Though,
hangover
sort of
technique. But anyway, no, or actually, best of all, have a bite to eat and a pint of water before you go to bed. That's the pro move.
I had a lot of
Kebab.
water.
That's a massive sweaty kebab before you go to bed. So that you wake up and you've still got bits of chili sauce in your stubble.
And your jaw hurts because your teeth are clogged with meat.
And you're just like, what was that?
Garlic sauce.
Exactly.
Those things just look horrible, those big, like, elephant's leg type.
Those donners.
Yeah, they're just... I can't,
Sometimes
I
there's
like
nothing quite like a
sheesh
donner, though.
kebab,
I'm
know
with
what I
you,
mean?
yeah.
Sometimes
It's probably with good lettuce, crispy lettuce. Oof.
I like chicken
Yeah.
on the shish kebab, isn't it?
Right,
Chicken
right.
on the stick.
Well,
It's
shish
nice,
kebab's
but-
lovely, and lamb shish. I mean,
Yeah,
where I
but-
used to live in Green Lanes in North London, it's basically like mini Turkey in London, and there's just so many amazing kebab places there.
I don't touch the lamb donut though. It looks like
lamb
one
doner,
texture.
that's the one I go. That's the one I go
always
in
go
on
chicken
if I'm in a
doner.
certain mood.
Really?
Well, it's like the sort of it's like having a massive KFC or something. You know you're going to hate yourself for it, but while you're eating it, you're like.
But that's the main one, isn't it? Lamb doner.
Yeah, that's the elephant leg one you're
Yeah.
referring to. But there's a chicken equivalent where they just put loads of bits of chicken fillet. and all that.
That's better. That's what I go for. Yeah.
Nah, man.
Seems
I'm
a bit more like meat. The other one looks like one texture. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So like you
Oh,
fuse together.
and it's so dodgy.
It's
It's
weird.
sat there for weeks.
It looks like
I mean,
carpet.
no, they go through them like in a couple of days.
Oh, maybe if it's a successful
Well, it
restaurant.
looks like it's been sat there for weeks. It's
Yeah.
all dry and
I mean-
crusty and...
Yeah, in terms of sort of hygiene best practice, let's get a bit of meat, heat it up, and then just leave it there for a bit, and then heat it up again when someone wants a bit more. That's not normally how I do it.
it's
But
not.
but you know what? I'm all in,
Yeah.
and I don't think I've ever got food poisoning from one. Although maybe they're counting on it being indistinguishable from the effects of heavy drinking. They go, oh, it must have been a bad pint.
yeah. Was it the kebab? Are you sure?
Anyway, I've got the munchies for a doner now. Thanks a lot.
I bet you didn't get to talk to the orange guy about this sort of thing, did you? When you were at MWC?
No, well, it's hard to say. That's the other thing. You know, it's another reminder. By the way, he was great, and I'm really grateful he came on. Philippe Lucas from Orange. But, you know,
Very good.
when you've only just met him, when you sat down, you know, and he's an exec, obviously he's not going to come on and just start cracking beers and
Talking about his doner kebab.
telling jokes and
It's
stuff.
also a loud environment.
You know, that's why, you know, I get a lot of people asking to come on the pod, and I say, well, you know, I need to know a bit. I need to know that they're sort of capable of just joining in the banter and all that sort of thing. But I've got a few people potentially lined up who I haven't met before. So having said that, we'll see how it goes. I mean, you've got to take risks. You never know. But yeah, it can be, you know, we've got a certain way of talking. I was talking to, I'm not going to say anything indiscreet here, so hopefully you won't mind. I was talking to Neil McRae from BT, and he was going, I don't know how you get away with some of the shit you say on the pod. And, you know, I bet I can guess from Neil McRae, he seems like a sort of perfectly decent bloke and a normal human being. I'm sure when he goes out with his mates, he talks in the same way. He's just saying, I can't believe you get away with
Yeah.
broadcasting it on the platform owned by a FTSE 100 company. There we are. Thanks, Informer, for putting up with us. Famous last words.
That'll be it now.
Yeah. Anyway, let's crack on. So we're gonna recap Mobile World Congress again
Yeah.
from the safety of our little pod here. We're going to talk about Ericsson, then we're going to talk about Ukraine. Oh yeah, I already did all this, didn't I?
You did.
So that's what we're going to chat about. All right,
You should just keep doing that again and again, and we
Yeah.
have this long loop that lasts for an hour and a half.
the whole thing is just going to be a summary. Okay, so yes, well then let's just get on with it. Why don't I having wittered for a while, why don't I hand the ball to you, Ian? Just give us, start with just your top line recollections of Mobile World Congress, and then we'll drill down into individual topics and stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a pleasant surprise to see so many people there. It's probably my main takeaway, actually, which is maybe a bit of an odd one. But I think after 3 years of not actually going, and having to do stuff on video links, and then last year obviously they did their massively slimmed down one when they were hoping for about 40,000 people but got 20,000, and most of the exhibitors weren't there, and it was all a bit of a damp squib of a show, I think, from talking to people.
Yeah.
It was in hell of a weather though.
Right. Well, the weather
but can you imagine
better.
though, walking around with all that mask shit when it's
No, it's
proper hot?
air conditioned inside anyway.
Okay,
Yeah,
fair
maybe.
enough. It was in the media bit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Quite cold.
Yeah.
Such that the beers I brought from home for the pod were still cold by
Oh, it was
like 3
extra
p.m. when we're
finished.
doing the pod. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I just think it was good to see. I think they came out with the figures, didn't they, pretty quickly afterwards, 61,000, which is right at the upper end of their estimate. I mean, last year they got it badly wrong by about 20,000.
Right.
They'd said 40 to 60, got 61.
Yeah.
And it felt like a really nice number, actually. I think
It did.
most people that we were talking to were saying that, normally you go and it's 110 potentially, and you can't, it's just hard to get anywhere. You're constantly having to barge
Well, even
past people.
Philippe Luca, who, let's not forget, Orange is a founder member of the GSMA,
Yeah.
he was sort of saying that. And
Yeah.
I joked to him, I went, can you have a word and cap it at 60 from now on? And
Yeah,
he
yeah.
gave me a Gallic shrug.
And all the people, I mean, I don't think anybody really pulled out. I know there was a bit of news about Sony, I think, early on, and maybe another
Right.
company, but
Google
I
was
don't
in
think,
there.
in fairness, they'd actually renewed after 2019. It was...
Well, some people were still cashing in on the 2020 credit.
Right, okay.
I won't name any names, but I certainly spoke to some vendors who have, to narrow it down, quite large stands.
Yeah,
And they were going, well, I mean, we still had the credit.
right.
So it was almost... The weird
Yeah, of
thing
course,
is,
yeah.
then it's almost like we might as well turn up, but that leads to a certain half-assedness, potentially, as well.
Yeah.
They had 2 less holes compared to 2019.
They did have
still,
2
yeah?
less halls, which
Yeah.
helped.
That
I
probably
think.
made
No
it,
Hall 8, which
It
is
made
fine,
it feel
I welcome
busier,
that.
obviously. If
Yeah,
people
but-
had been a bit more dispersed, it wouldn't have been, maybe wouldn't have had quite the same busy feel. But it just,
That
it was
Hall
a
8,
nice
which
number,
is a
I
schlep
think.
anyway. I was
Yeah.
pleased to see the back
I
of that.
feel like the bit below the media village, like Orange actually, that was the busiest bit. It seemed
Probably.
Yeah,
so busy.
yeah, it was busy. Ran Hall 3.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't too impressed with the overly rigorous enforcement of mask
my
wearing.
God.
I thought that was a bit over the top. I mean, they need to drop that really by next year, because I didn't meet anybody who thought very highly of that. And my experience, having set up a lot of meetings there, was that as soon as you get into a meeting room anyway, people just take the
Yeah.
Well, as
masks
soon as you
off.
sit down.
As soon as you're out of the prying eye, away from the sort of prying eyes of those, the sort of GSMA youth who come over and accost you if you take a sip of water without your mask on.
I'm not going
And
to
you-
detail it now, but I had a couple of run-ins with those
Yeah, well, I think everybody did.
Those little over-empowered
Yeah.
youths.
Oh yeah, the bit when you got thrown out.
I mean, I know they're trying to
And
sort of go
subsequent
along
police.
with local health and safety
Yeah, yeah.
and all that.
But
I think
I don't know. That's
it
what
was
I don't know.
overdone.
I genuinely don't know one way or the other whether it was totally forced on them or the GSMA decided to take it up to another level. Because, like, walking around Barcelona, there's no aggro about wearing them outside. And to be fair to Mobile World Congress, when you got those eating bits,
Yeah.
outside bits, no one was giving you shit
Yeah,
there. So that's fine. It's Spanish custom that you only do it when you get inside. And then obviously if you're sitting down eating and drinking, that's a bit silly. Although there were some times where people were getting hassled for like not putting it up, sipping
I
between
know.
sips
Well,
of
this
water and
is
stuff.
silly,
Huh? I mean,
Yeah.
I
I mean,
never.
the
Really?
need for those FFP2 masks, which is not mandated by the Spanish
There we
government
go.
anywhere else. Why you had to?
So
have
it does make you
those,
feel like they decided to take it to
they're
another
a bit
level.
less forgiving, aren't they?
And again,
to
I've got
breathe
some
through and-
sympathy because they were like, Jesus Christ, it's been 3 years.
Yeah.
We've got to do everything we can to make this a success, and we've got to make all the appropriate nods to health and safety. I completely understand all that. I think we can both agree with that. It's not a big criticism. It was on the whole a really good show.
Yeah.
But they could have just taken it down a notch or
Yeah.
two, and I think everything would have been all right.
I think so. I think it's a good thing. It's a good sign that I think people want to come back to events actually, and it's
Yeah.
obviously very good news for 2023. And I think it's potentially a good sign for other events. I mean, we don't really know yet whether people just decide they want to go to that and still carry on doing other things by Zoom and not travelling as much. So it sort of remains to be seen.
Well, that's a
But-
concern for any events company is
Yeah.
whether 2 years of people learning to do without them
Yeah,
has made them think, "Do you know what, we don't need this shit."
yeah.
But, there's just no substitute. I know it's a cliche about that people do business with people and all that sort of thing, but there's just no substitute for just meeting people and having a chat.
Exactly. And I mean, in terms of, if I'm going to be critical, I think there was a lack of news, I thought, from the show.
explicitly from the show. Yeah,
there was a lack of big news. There's usually something that happens at MWC where someone makes a really big announcement, or there's something.
Well, there's a theme.
There's a strong theme that's quite new, or someone makes a big announcement. I thought all the themes were very tired themes, and I don't think there was a really big news announcement. I mean, Deutsche Telekom did its press con, which is a very silly thing to do. I think they did this press conference a week before the actual event. I mean, they've always in the past had the executives there on the stand. Timotheus Hertges and Claudia Nemat, as the CEO and the sort of CTIO respectively, talking about the latest, things they've launched and what they're going to do this year and what the strategy is. And the weird thing was that she was there. She was doing sort of presentations, and yet they didn't have the press conference. So there was no. It wasn't as though they didn't send her there and they didn't have the same space and they didn't have people sitting down in the audience. I don't know why they did that. I mean, maybe they thought it's going to get lost in all the other announcements, but...
Were you just about to say something?
Sorry,
I was
Peter.
just going to say from a consumer point of view, there wasn't like 2019 thing was like, here's the folding phone. Like, oh my God, big deal. There was no...
It's becoming less of a phone show.
The handset side of it's tricky. I mean, and,
Samsung was like, here's another Galaxy. Okay, cool.
Well, but this has been a problem, as a former smartphone analyst, it's been a problem almost for about a decade now, where... to use the industry vernacular, the form factor matured.
Yeah.
We used to call these things, they used to come up with stupid little names like a candy bar and to distinguish it from a flip phone or a slider or this, that and the other. But basically, the whole screen rectangle has, it matured onto that a decade ago, and there's only two platforms, and one of which is self-contained, Apple. So there's only one platform for everyone else. So most of the innovation in terms of user experience is done by Google, not by the OEMs. They can try their skins and they can try this and that, but normally people don't give a shit. So it's really hard to innovate on smartphones.
They didn't have some years they would have Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or Lewis Hamilton.
Exactly.
There was nobody.
They didn't even have. I mean, one thing they've always had, which sort of starts the ball rolling, is Ericsson on a Monday morning doing their press conference with Boya Ekholm on stage. And it sort of starts...
hindsight, I bet they pleased they didn't have that.
Yeah, I mean, they've obviously got other things to worry about, which we'll come on to. Yeah. But it felt like it didn't really get off with a bang. All sort of... a lot of the stuff was... there's Open RAN was obviously a big theme, but Open RAN was a big theme last time it happened. It wasn't as though anybody went... We're going to... I mean, I think Vodafone's CTO got up on stage, didn't he? And I didn't see him because I don't tend to go to the conference presentations at Mobile World Congress, but apparently he did a talk where he said 30% of our networks will be based on Open RAN by 2030, and I think some of that was probably
Vodafone
didn't
Vodafone didn't have a presence at all.
Well, they didn't really have a presence. They had him. He came and said that. That's quite a big thing to say, and that's probably one of the main things that got said. But it wasn't as though anybody else was making any... I mean, there are lots of kit companies and chip vendors that had come out with statements leading up to Mobile World Congress about having new hardware accelerators available, and you can, and that's potentially going to make a big difference to performance, which has always been one of the issues about using sort of general purpose processors. And it's all very interesting, and you need all that. But it wasn't as though there was an operator going, we're going to do this, and it's going to be in place by... I mean, the biggest press conference is probably Orange saying we're going to shut down our 2G and 3G networks by 2030.
Yeah, which Philip Luca mentioned on the pod, on the previous pod, and he actually made a similar point to the one you just made, which is that there wasn't a theme. He put a positive spin on it, which he said, it's good that it wasn't a dominant theme. But I take your point. There wasn't one there. I mean, going in, I was thinking, and obviously we did our preview pod sort of 2 ago.
Yeah.
It was going to be that, where's 5G now compared to 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And the answer is a bit further along, but it's hard to... I mean, this is a problem with 5G that we've spoken about countless times. It's a bit further on, but how much further on, and in which areas, and why does it matter? All these things remain a bit hard to...
I think it's
nailed down.
I think I sort of alluded to this in the wrap-up I did, but it almost feels like Mobile World Congress has always had this sort of air of unreality about it. It's an industry that's in constant turmoil and worried about being overtaken by big tech, and it's heavily indebted. These new generations of technology haven't really delivered the sales boost that everybody hoped. 5G, we're in a position now where operators are flogging assets like towers. I think there was a story today about Telecoms.
Yeah.
And
you might like the copy I wrote on it, because I decided to be a little bit facetious and go, If you're a mechanic,
No,
you
that's
wouldn't.
not-
Yeah, it's not like me. If you're a mechanic, you wouldn't flog your spanners. If you're a hairdresser, you wouldn't flog your scissors.
Yeah.
You know.
But then you look at their debt, how much
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
got in debt at the moment. You think, but it's just, you know, there's all this glitz and glamour at the event and these big stands and displays of virtual reality, and yet where is Telecom? It's kind of like more and more like a
They had that
utility
stand with
sort
that
of come-
Boston Dynamic fucking Black Mirror dog on it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
I mean,
there was several actually.
there were some quite whizzy things going on, which maybe we haven't seen before.
SK.
More robot dogs. There was a barman, wasn't there? Robot barman.
Oh, so
that was
slow, by the
incredibly
way.
slow.
So stupid.
Yeah,
It was. Why
the
it didn't have
barman?
to look like a. It was. So
it was the
stupid.
slowest barman ever. I mean, you could
Right.
only use him in the quietest village in the world on the slowest night of the year.
Maybe that was the
because
barman at the
otherwise
BT
people-
drinks on Tuesday night. Oh, he went there. No, 'cause Ian, I remember at some stage about 1 a.m, he was just going, "I'm fucking going. I'm not getting served." I was going, "Oh, come on, mate, cheer up."
And I just I think, you know, they're struggling to latch onto things really to sort of feel. I mean, there was a bit of talk about 5G standalone as the next thing that's coming along, you know, in 5G, and you know, we've been talking to BT about that already, haven't we? With
Yeah.
press conferences that they've had and everything. But I find it a bit hard to get excited really by 5G standalone. You know,
Well, what does it mean?
Well, it's.
I mean, I know what it means in principle. I.e., we're not piggybacking on the 4G sort of core and infrastructure.
new
But what does it
core.
mean in practice? Why do we care?
Well, this is the problem, I think. I mean, the operators might care because it might be more efficient and they can distribute the core around the network, and they you know, they like the sound of being able to reduce latency and some of the efficiencies that they get from moving to a more sort of software model and all of that. But and they can bring new spectrum into play, I think, as well. This is the other thing, you know, that sort of brings some of this 700 megahertz to have sort of low band 5G coverage.
But does that require SA to do?
Well, they've got that, and they've not sort of used that
Okay.
with 4G, haven't they? It was sort of awarded some of that
I
for
see.
for
Okay.
rollout with. But it's kind of, you know, I mean, one issue is obviously having the devices, which they keep saying aren't quite ready yet. But it's one of those things. Are consumers really going to care about it? I mean, I went to this demo before, and we talked about this already. This sort of David Attenborough Green Planet demo based on standalone, where they were saying that technology is really important because the rendering of graphics that you've got in this kind of AR, you know, extended reality experience that you see just wouldn't work on a non-standalone network. You need standalone to
pipe.
be able to do it.
Right.
It's like the latency's needed.
Latency and the fatter pipe,
The latency
yeah.
they were saying is averaging about 16 or 17, whereas if you did it on a non-standalone
Well, that's why
network,
the
it would
use
be
case.
higher.
I think that's why the use cases are always obsessed about AR, VR, metaverse.
Yeah.
It's because you can see how VR over wireless requires both a fatter pipe and the low latency, which are two of the three corners of the why you give a fuck about 5G triangle.
I mean, sorry, the metaverse thing. I just truly don't understand it because if we keep talking about Ready Player One, yeah.
Yeah.
For as an example, to me, the metaverse is ultimately the thing to experience from home. I mean, that's the whole point: is that you go in a different world from home,
Yeah.
where it would be basically
Well, VR, I
powered
don't
by
see
a
how you
good
can do
fiber
VR in the
connection.
street without walking into lampposts and in front
Yeah,
of cars.
and if you have to wear the suit and stuff, you're not
Yeah.
going to do this on the street. You're going to do this at home, where you have a fiber connection to power it. Like,
But this is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
funny. This
No, I
is the
think
funny
that's a
thing
fairly good point.
because it's potentially one of the other themes that was at the show is the metaverse. You know, it was on quite
it's
a few
the ultimate
stands.
fiber thing.
It was on. You know, whether it's fiber or 5G or whatever it is, it was something that was plastered on. I mean, Telefonica, I think, have metaverse over their stand. There are a few others that have obviously latched onto this ever since Facebook started talking it up. And what did we get at the start of the show? We got a big blog written by one of Facebook's top sort of engineers saying that networks aren't good enough to support the metaverse and huge changes are needed and, you know, require a massive investment in edge that isn't happening. And, you know, I was thinking this even before that came out. How is the metaverse a good thing for all these operators are going around now? They're sort of, you know, using the word, people like Telefonica, and all excited by these metaverse use cases. And you're thinking, why is this a good thing for operators? Sell flat rate data plans, unlimited data, and the more they do that, the more they have to spend on their networks, because people are using more and more of this stuff. It's an ever increasing cost without them getting the money back, because the prices are being forced down all the time.
Presumably the rationale is that they have these flat rate data plans, but they're tiered, so they may be thinking that if you're on a 30 quid a month job now, the metaverse might encourage you to go onto a 60 quid a month one.
There's no way that this is almost like people thinking that 3G was going to persuade you to double ARPU because people would buy data services along with voice. It's just been proven to be a complete fallacy. You look at the history of you look at what's happened to ARPU, and it always gets forced down. There's no way that the metaverse is going to make telecom customers pay 60, 100 quid.
No, and the money will end up
20,
with Meta
now.
or whatever.
And the people who'll benefit from it will be Meta, it'll be other tech companies maybe. And for operators, all it is a potential nightmare of a job. I talked to a few people about this, and this is the interesting thing. The whole net neutrality argument is now starting to become a bit louder, isn't it? Partly because of things like the metaverse. Operators are increasingly worried about all this data they're getting on their networks, and they can't monetize it easily. And one option for them to monetize it, they'd like to be able to do, is to go off and say... And I talked to Orange about this, actually, a guy called Laurent Leboucher, who's the group CTO.
The Butcher?
Leboucher. Is that what it is?
With the U or OU?
It's Leboucher.
Yeah, the Butcher.
So I talked to the Butcher about it.
They've got Le Boucher, Le Boulanger, et Le Pâtissier.
And Paolo the fisherman.
What's fisherman in French?
Pêcheur.
Pescatore,
Italian,
isn't it? Yeah.
Pescatore, not Paolo. Oh, that's what you were referring to. Sorry, I just caught up with you. I bumped into Paolo, actually, in
I didn't see
Congress.
Paolo.
I just saw him on the screen. He was a big star.
Yeah. No, it's good to chat to him.
But anyway, the Butcher at Orange was saying that we need to... they've made no secret of it. They were one of the companies that put their name on this letter that was published in the FT, saying we need to reappraise the relationship between operators and big tech, and regulators need to take a look at these net neutrality rules. And he was saying to me, if the metaverse comes along, it's even more of a reason. We need someone to help us pay for it. We can't be the ones that pay for this.
Well, that's true. So they were trying to reframe it as like, well, you got to chip in. There was that whole EU thing, wasn't it? Oh no, was it Etno or someone like that? Someone was saying you all got to chip in. There was a public letter. Yeah,
we don't really know what. It's interesting looking at the Facebook blog, because the guy, I can't remember his, I think it's Dan Rabinovitz he's called, but he was saying that the metaverse is going to require sort of 1 or 2 millisecond latency, which is really low. It's more than you can get from the sort of stuff that... you talked to Howard Watson, you were mentioning that we interviewed him and put him on video in LR. And
he did.
Chatted to him a bit about that, and he was talking... I was saying, how many edge data centers do you need? When they go to standalone, this is one of the things they want to do, is to actually use this ability to distribute the core more easily, to build out more data centers, and then you can sort of use those also for your edge applications.
Because the actual the realities of physics mean that you lower latency by bringing where the network processing happens closer to the terminal, i.e. the
shortening
device.
the journey.
And because it's speed of light, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think BT was thinking about sort of 10 data centers, which would get you to a point where you can do maybe 10, 20 millisecond services, which they say is enough, is ample for the sort of stuff that you can envisage at the moment. A lot of the kind of, as I say, this David Attenborough demo was 16, 17, I think, and worked very well. But we just, if Facebook has this vision of the metaverse being something a lot more sophisticated than that, and they really do think it needs 1 or 2, that would require a much bigger overhaul, presumably. And maybe 5G and the stuff they're talking about doing with standalone just isn't quite up to the job.
But I'm still with the point Pierre just made.
I think
why do you need 5G? You don't need 5G for VR.
The metaverse is going to be the perfect thing to justify buying a 1 gig connection at home.
Yeah.
That's why you want to be sitting
comfortably. And even the wireless bit when you're at home is done over Wi-Fi, not 5G.
Exactly. Wi-Fi 6 is going to do... I see my nephews...
It depends where you do the metaverse, doesn't it, I suppose?
Well, but that's the point. I don't see how. AR, I can see it. Heads-up displays, glasses like these, where I can see all this augmented shit going on. That's all fine. Other bits and bobs of metaverse, whatever they might turn into, fine. But pure VR...
It has to be at home.
But you've got to be in a padded cell to do it.
But maybe the metaverse... I talked to... Tariq Amin at Rakuten about the Meta very, very briefly at the end of my
That was the chat that made you bail on the podcast.
Yeah, because I was with him for about an hour, I think.
It better have been worth it.
It was good. It's good to get so much of his time, because he's obviously someone who people seek out at the moment. But I just threw in a last question, like, what do you think of the metaverse? What does it mean for operators? And he was like, I mean, he's a tech guy, so he's very enthused by all this stuff, obviously. It's not come as no surprise.
A bit of tech.
He's not going to say, oh, it's all rubbish, we should all go and read books or something. So, but he was saying, he could see a point where you have, like, my glasses are a sort of extended reality enabled, and it's not about sitting in a room and doing some VR game or
but that's
AR. That's basically AR.
But it could be a lot more
Augmented
sophisticated than the type of AR that we're thinking about now. We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about some of the science fiction films you see where people have got glasses on.
Heads-up displays.
And it could require
different from the metaverse to me. Because the metaverse is really, you want to go into a different world. Yeah,
the metaverse taken literally as a virtual environment where you've got virtual banks, virtual shops, you can buy virtual real estate. You can presumably have a virtual girlfriend and get up to all kinds of shit that we're not going to get into now.
I mean, I've seen my nephews. One of them.
That's like Strange Days, yeah.
I tell you,
over Christmas, I would see my oldest nephew was on Roblox, which I've never heard of. On his computer,
all the time.
Which was a desktop computer, so that was through the Wi-Fi.
So Roblox is like a sort of proto-metaverse type of thing. Same as Minecraft.
Yeah, and the other one was with the Oculus, but he was playing obviously in the living room. He was not like out on the street, so this was all over Wi-Fi.
I know. So they've got a long journey of persuading, certainly me and Pierre, it seems, of what this means practically. I understand the utopian side of it, but practically how I could incorporate the metaverse into my life, I'm still struggling to see.
I think there were sort of themes that you kind of expected to be there, or I expected to be there, that weren't. And maybe it was, but I just didn't notice it.
It's so hard to know, isn't it?
It's hard to know because you're in a lot of meetings, and I was probably more this year than I usually am.
And I was doing a bunch of commercial videos,
and you were doing
so it's hard for me to keep up with everything.
But I didn't see a lot about. I mean, one of the big things about the later stages of 5G and standalone and where it goes now is it's supposed to become more about the enterprise, and more about the business opportunity.
Yeah.
And I didn't see a lot of that. I didn't see a huge amount of talk or hear a lot of discussion about it, or see stands where a lot of that was going on. I mean, Pierre and I did an interview with Rima, can't remember her surname, Rima Qureshi at Verizon. Yeah,
and used to be at Nokia.
Did she? I didn't know that she used to be at Nokia. I think
so. It rings a bell.
She's Verizon's chief
shit.
strategy officer now.
Right.
And she's quite interesting because she's had this sort of one of the weird sort of scary robot dogs that they use for. She was talking about using it.
Did she have her own one in case you got lippy?
They talked about it like it was an actual pet, but it wasn't working the day that. I mean, Pierre wanted to film it moving around.
Wish I could turn my fucking dog off.
But I mean, that's something that they've helped develop, and they're using it for. They're supporting that as a part of an offer that they have for customers. It could potentially be used for things like security checks, so you don't have to send people in to check sites if they might be. It's all a bit sinister because you can sort of envisage it being used in war zones almost.
I'll tell you what, talking about sinister, I just looked up Rima Qureshi on my laptop. She's on
the top of light reading at the moment on the carousel.
But she's the third thing that came up is Rima Qureshi, the World Economic Forum. That's the Klaus Schwab,
right? Yeah,
fucking you'll own nothing and you'll be happy place.
Davos,
all that, and she's a member of the board of directors of MasterCard as well, which I might come on to in the Ukraine segment. But I want to see if I was right about Nokia. Anyway, she's obviously a senior person, but very much part of the establishment. Ericsson, not Nokia. Oh my god, I fucked up Ericsson, there. Okay. I got it entirely wrong.
You knew it was Scandinavian.
It was Ericsson. My bad. So she used to be at Ericsson, not Nokia.
But she had some interesting stuff to say about what they're doing at Verizon Business on these use cases. But there's no. It's not like you see a lot of operators making huge amounts of money out of 5G business services at the moment, and I still feel a lot of this is quite nascent. It's not really kind of taken off, and it's almost like every year you go back and you hear, well, next year's the year, and and you talk to the analysts, and a lot of them are still saying that when it comes to things like private wireless, 4G is still actually good enough for a lot of the stuff that companies want to do. Yep. It's the same, and a lot of it's the stuff that you and Pierre were just saying about. You can use a fibre connection at home to do a lot of these things. I know they talk about having wireless factories and campuses, and it's nice to get the wires out of the way. But actually, I think a lot of the time, in a lot of cases, they would be quite happy with a fibre line or even Wi-Fi 6 or something, rather than, 5G's always got it's continually this sort of technology that feels it has to sort of justify itself.
Totally. Well, I was just going to say that because I'm going to move it on in a sec. The definite feeling is it's like there's that build it and they will come thing, but they're struggling to come up with reasons why they should come. And it's a bit reminiscent of 3G. There's this other sort of cliche within telecoms is that the odd generations are the sort of first effort, and the even generations is when they get it right.
Yeah.
And, that's obviously a very crude thing, and this is happening over decades. But 3G was a bit like that with mobile broadband. Mobile broadband wasn't really proper till 4G came along.
Yeah.
And 5G, there's lots of sort of speculative, or maybe it's about this, maybe it's about that. This can be a thing, but 3 years after, that was my view, which I probably articulated on the preview pod, that we're going to go in and we're going to see how's 5G come along in 3 years, and the conclusion has to be not that far.
Yeah.
I think.
Totally, yeah.
That's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
All right, I better move it on because we've got so much stuff to chat about. So talking about Ericsson, where Rima Qureshi is presumably happy not to still be working at the moment.
Zing.
Meow, etc. And believe me, I take no pleasure in this. It's just this is the story.
Yeah.
So Nick Wood, one of our two excellent freelancers, Nick and Mary, wrote it up. He covered it while we were in Barcelona, so it's quite handy having proper experienced freelancers. Nick and Mary used to run a site equivalent to Telecoms.com themselves, so they're totally up to speed. And so Andrew and I could be scurrying around. I was doing my commercial stuff. Andrew did a great job of, given that he's only been working for us for 2 months, of covering loads of stuff. He got lots of traction on, especially a Mavenir story, where they just sort of gave it large at the vendors, and he did a great job of covering that. And then what was that? Talking about the photo. Yeah, the photo. Mavenir especially loved the photo that he used. And anyway, so Nick and Mary were covering the other stuff that wasn't on the show floor, and this Ericsson thing to do with Iraq was very much breaking. So just to recap, the top line of the story is, I think other media, this has been something that had been out in the press, and Ericsson been forced to confront it by the fact that the media were already covering it, that they've been doing some business in Iraq over a time when there were all these sanctions and there was ISIS there, and it's the usual fucking chaos that you associate with that neck of the woods. And then I think the inference in the story was that Ericsson sort of directly did business with people who had links to ISIS, or maybe were card-carrying ISIS, I don't know, in order to make things work. Because I presume there are parts of Iraq over that time where, unless you sign off from ISIS, you were doing nothing.
They were basically paying people so they could bomb around Iraq more quickly with base stations in the back of the van.
Yeah, bomb around. I'm not sure I would have picked
Poor
that.
choice of words.
And then they couldn't be sure where some of the money went. So it might have been the case that some of these roads that were controlled by ISIS, then people were paying them to sort of open it up to them. And
there was a spectrum of culpability, from the most benign interpretation, which is, they paid someone else who paid someone else and ended up, and the money ended up in the pocket of someone that, in hindsight, they'd rather it hadn't ended up, to a more full understanding of what the money trail was. And I don't know, this is all other people's reporting, I'm not going to claim it as fact. But this basically really overshadowed their Mobile World Congress. It must be said, I thought Ericsson, with all due respect, were half-hearted about the whole thing. They still had their big stand, but it was deliberately. Yeah, I did go to their stand.
Could you just, because in the past, and I didn't go to Ericsson's stand this year, I walked in front of it a few times, and it looked a little bit inaccessible. It looked like they had people.
Yeah, that sort of.
It was
wall.
more like a Huawei stand where you have to. Sort of go
actually, to be fair to Ericsson, it was because we had those digital passes this year.
Yeah.
To get in, actually, your digital pass worked for the Ericsson thing as long as you'd been signed off.
Right.
So we
had to be signed off. You couldn't just walk in.
You could just bowl in, no.
Because in the past you've just been able to bowl in.
I know you always had to be on the list for Ericsson.
You could be media and just go in there and use their media facilities.
I thought you had to be on the list.
If you're media, yeah.
You could go in, you could get a coffee in the little coffee bar.
I thought
you could sit at the table.
But I assumed it was always because we were on their list because we were always going there to do interviews.
The ones that had made it harder in the past were Nokia, where you had to sort of be signed off. But Ericsson was always very accessible. You could always go there. You could sit at the front where they serve coffee. You could walk. There's a media room you could go and use to avoid the really busy.
Eat some pickled herrings for breakfast.
Totally, and it just looks a bit more like they'd sort of.
Yeah, no, they were more closed and it was deliberate. And I don't think this is something they were hiding. They were just going, we'll have less people this year. And Ericsson's always been
everybody else. The message was at odds with what everybody else was doing, it seemed to me.
Well, Ericsson, don't forget, Ericsson was the first and most significant one to bail in 2020.
Yeah.
They seem to be, I don't know if it's a Swedish thing or an Ericsson thing or whatever, they seem to be ultra conscious of the health and safety side of things.
Yeah.
And that's fine, each their own. We're a bit more laissez-faire.
Just way to reduce the amount
Pierre's a bit less laissez-faire. Yeah, COVID earlier on the week, and he was being considerate and going, "You sure you want to do the pod, you guys?" In case
I tested negative this morning, for real.
Yeah. But I wouldn't have minded if you hadn't, because I'm not bothered.
I just think it's the general feeling from the show was that people are past worrying too much about this now. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had 61,000 people there.
Totally.
It feels like Ericsson's sort of 9 months behind the curve.
I feel that's true. And anyway, and so that led to their stand just being a sort of muted affair. Whereas, the story I wrote at Mobile World Congress, this is sort of going back to the previous segment, but I'll do it quickly, was about Huawei.
Yeah.
And they just brought it full on. Which, when you consider what's happened to Huawei in the years between the last Mobile World Congress in 2019 and this one, I thought was a really interesting statement of intent, and I wrote it up that way. And I'm sure one of the reasons it got some traffic is people were like, it's because it's a bit contrarian.
Yeah.
And, and we'll come on to, other things to do with Huawei now. But I just thought fair play to them for fronting up. I think they've had to put up with, whether or not you think it's justified, they've had to put up with a lot of exceptional shit from the US and its allies in terms of them being banned from markets, in terms of them not getting access to chips, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But they're still going, well, we're still here. And I thought fair play to them. And we went out for dinner with them on the Sunday night, and, that's the other great thing about things like these trade shows is you go out with people and you meet them and they're just normal people. Yeah, they might speak a different language to you and they might look a bit different from you, but they're still people and they've still got the same drivers. They still want to go out, have a bite to eat, have a chat, do some business, earn some money, look after their kids, whatever it is that everyone's drivers are. And you only really appreciate that from just sitting down for a couple of hours with someone and rinsing their expenses budget. So I think I'm all favour of that. But anyway, back to the Ericsson thing. And back to the actual story. Well, I'll hand it over to you. I've done a bit of wittering now. We were just chatting before we started, Iain. So that's the basic. That they got in the shit, and then Nick wrote a story this week about how you've got some people suing them in the States, and you've got they had a settlement a year or two ago with the States over some other corruption that they were supposedly up to, and I can't remember, North Africa or whatever. And for some reason they had to settle with the States, which still rankles with me. Why if you fuck up anywhere in the world, do you have to answer to the Americans? But anyway, that's just one of those things.
Well, I can comment on that in a minute.
We'll do. And so they're in the shit there. And basically, before I hand it over to you, for me, the real problem for this isn't what they did or didn't do in Iraq. It's what it says about their transparency and how they communicate with their investors, with the outside world, with regulators and all that sort of thing. And I think that's why their share price gone down the toilet, why they're in trouble. Over to you. Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing sort of blew up before Mobile World Congress, I think. As you say, they've been sort of quizzed by the media, and then this all came out, and they had a statement about it. And then they obviously felt the need to do a conference call with analysts and reporters from the show, actually. In fact, I was actually due to go to Ericsson's stand to be shown around and meet a couple of people.
And then they had to do that instead.
And they went, and then I got an email saying, would you like to join this conference call with Boya Ekholm? So I thought, well, that's more important
to do.
And
Nick covered that for us.
Right, so I took myself off to quite a bit of the hall and sat there with my headphones on. And he was basically, I mean, I had all the equity analysts on there and a couple of sort of journalists like me, Bloomberg, obviously, and some of the big news wires. And he's obviously under a lot of pressure to sort of explain to investors, how it happened.
In an awkward position.
And And I think that this is the thing, like you said, I think this is why their share price has gone down a lot and they've suffered, is this sort of perception that I think there's a few things. I think one is a perception they haven't really got on top of these corporate governance issues. So they had this situation that is very historical. I think goes back to the days of Hans Vestberg,
certainly a decade or two.
Well before Ecom joined, that came out a couple of years ago. Where there were widespread reports of corruption in numerous markets, where they were accused of sort of bribing officials and doing all sorts of things to sort of get deals, and they had to have a massive clean out. Various people left the company, and as you say, the DOJ in America weighed in and sort of fined them, I think about $1 billion. They paid to sort of settle it all.
And at the time, that felt like a bit of a let off. Like they could have been done for a lot more. It could have been worse.
And then
part of it was a settlement where they promised to be good from now on.
Yeah, and I don't think it reflected badly on Ecom. I think it was an irritant to him while he was trying to turn around the company. This had happened
because it's historical shit.
It was historical, and I think his position was, this is really bad. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. This is what we're doing. And they went through this long list. Had this huge sort of
squeaky clean.
This is what we're going to do. And then, so for all of this to come out, and I think this is the embarrassing thing this time, is it sort of extends into his time in charge. I think it runs up to sort of 2019.
You can't blame it on Vestberg anymore.
And it looks like they, so he was under pressure on the call to answer why they didn't sort of admit to it earlier. They obviously knew that something was going on, and it was only when media started asking questions that they went.
And there was some initial fudge. It's like we looked into it, and it wasn't a big deal. And we decided not to bother with you.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like what
he explained it a little bit better on the call. So apparently, before they implemented all these changes to these corporate governance changes and attempt to be more transparent and make it easier for problems to be reported, they used to get something like 164 complaints a year, internal sort of things they had to investigate, I think, and it's gone up to about 1,000.
Wow.
And he said the reason it's gone up so much is because we've made it easier for people to come forwards. It's the reporting. But the consequence of that is you get a lot of stuff that you have to look at and consider.
Right, and you better do it properly.
And also, you need to protect the identities of the people who are coming forwards, You've got to be quite careful about what you disclose, because otherwise it might not encourage people. You can see where he's coming from. A situation like Iraq, where there's suggestions money went to terrorist organisations, you've got to protect staff who are sort of whistleblowers,
Totally.
And be quite careful about how you. And this was his sort of rationale for not being this whole sort of not being as forthcoming as they were made out to be.
It's like we're playing with fire here. We've got to be careful.
Totally. You can sort of see his point to some extent. I mean, I think in fairness, I would say there's a lot of scrutiny and these measures that they've taken mean there's a lot more kind of. They're looking a lot more keenly at the stuff that goes on internally than perhaps other companies are.
But they are. Maybe they're fucking all over.
I mean,
it at the moment.
Look, a market like Iraq, where it's not just Ericsson that's present there, but there's other big equipment vendors that I don't want to name because I don't want to start making sort of allegations on the podcast. But
careful now.
But it must be very, not just in telecom either. Anybody that's operating in a market like Iraq, when ISIS was in control of part of it,
I mean, that's dicey, isn't it?
I bet there's things that have gone on at other companies that haven't come to light yet, and that might do in the years ahead now that this Ericsson thing's out. And maybe they just haven't been uncovered.
Well, this is going to overlap with the Ukraine thing we talk about. I mean, when the shit hits a fan somewhere, all the rules change.
Yeah, and maybe Ericsson, the fact that it is now trying to be on top of all this stuff and look into it, maybe there are things going on at other companies just haven't come to light because they don't have the same kind of rigour. You know what I mean?
Yeah, possibly. But the fact still remains, the spotlight's on them now.
The other reason why their share price, I think, suffered a lot is there's a couple of worries, and Pierre was talking about this earlier. One is that they could get another big fine from the DOJ, maybe even bigger, which they couldn't rule out. The DOJ is looking into this now. The DOJ has said that they've come forwards now and said that Ericsson didn't provide enough information about things that were going on. I mean, that was actually what.
Yeah, but they're only saying that now that this new shit's come.
That actually prompted the call. It was actually the DOJ's coming forward and sort of saying,
that seems opportunistic by the DOJ. They were happy with it at the time, but now some new shit's come out, and now they've gone. Well,
no, I think it's partly related to other things as well.
Oh, okay.
The DOJ is not the only concern. I mean, you were saying, why is it always the DOJ that always comes along and issues these fines? I mean, anybody could.
I suppose
they were asked this question on the call.
No, that's a good point.
Is there a risk that other regulators do what the DOJ does. And I can't remember his name. He's the chief legal officer. He talks in complete legalese.
Right.
He's called Xavier something. And he basically, in a very wishy-washy sort of roundabout way, said, there's a good chance that other
I
regulators
suppose,
will look into
so
this.
while I'm having a go at the Yanks for always being the ones that do this, part of the reason they do it is because they can. Like why they're the world's policeman and all that sort of
they
thing.
could
They've just
say,
got
if
the
you're not
money
going
and
to pay,
the scale and
if you're not going to pay it, then we're going to sanction you, and you're not going to operate in the US anymore, or whatever. And if Ericsson makes most of its money in the US market, right? It makes most of its profit, certainly in the US market. Yeah. But there's no reason, there's nothing that would stop the Chinese or the European Commission. They're like hitting companies with fines, especially big tech. They love doing
the
all of
European
that.
Commission is one of the few other sort of organisations that's got the heft of the US in the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other reason I think why their share price suffered is there's now concern about what it could mean for the Vonage acquisition. So they're trying to buy Vonage for about, or Vonage, whatever you want to pronounce it.
That's what I call it, Vonage.
They're trying to buy Vonage. I'll do it your way for about 6 billion, I think.
Right.
Now they have. That's all in cash. They had sort of 6 billion. They had a similar amount to that.
6 billion in suitcases ready to go.
They had that in their balance sheet late last year. If they have to pay a big fine, it would make it financially harder for them to do that anyway. But it's not just that.
Could the Yanks block it? Could they just
it
go,
could be
you're
blocked.
an unworthy...
There's a suggestion it could be blocked. They were a bit sort of vague when they got asked about that. Well, I mean, I'm not convinced by the takeover. We talked about that before, but I don't think it would be good to parts of the investment community where they've managed to sell this as something that might be a good deal for them, and they're basing a lot of their enterprise strategy on that takeover. Clearly, you don't go and spend 6 billion unless you think it's a really sensible thing to do. That it might fail now because of this whole Iraq situation, and then the other thing is corporate reputation. Does it get to the point where I don't think this is actually an issue for them, but does it? And they were saying that there's no sign at all that operators are going, we don't want to deal with Ericsson anymore because of what it's done in Iraq. But that's the concern, that maybe companies start to back off. The thing that they've got in their favour is there's not a lot of other choices, are there? And it's not like the other ones are all sort of covered in, they're not all smelling of roses kind of thing.
Well, indeed. That was my biggest thing. I can't remember whether we've chatted about this on the pod before.
What, Iraq?
The specific Ericsson Iraq fuck up.
We talked about it, I think.
Right.
But yeah.
So I probably said this already, but I'll reiterate it. It was, for me, it's what it says, like from the point of investors and regulators and stakeholders in Ericsson. They fuck up once. And then they go, yeah, we've been bad. We've learnt our lessons. We'll be good from now on. Yeah. And then they fuck up again, and people are like, well, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Is this some systemic thing?
Yeah.
Are you incapable? And Ecom himself is being sued by some. Granted, this is in the States, and they'll sue anyone for anything.
I don't know what's going on with that and what that's all about.
Well, that was Nick's story earlier in the week.
Yeah.
But basically, someone's piled in.
I know
it's a class action lawsuit. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that much because in the States, I think I've said it on the pod before, they've got about 1 million lawyers. They've got all these lawyers on the starting blocks the whole time just waiting for a class action lawsuit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they just sue anyone for a laugh. They must think there's some merit in it.
Well, the other one is Sevian, the shareholder Sevian.
Yes, so you made that point, and Nick made that point.
Making noises about not being happy with how Ericsson's governed.
So Sevian's like an activist, they're an activist institutional investor.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's almost a weird thing for them to get sort of. They're often these activist shareholders tend to get worked up when the strategy's not working and you've not managed to.
But that's probably opportunistic as well. They're going, you see.
Yeah.
We need a changing of the guard, which is probably what they were agitating for other reasons.
Yeah, I'd be surprised. This is the thing that surprises me, though, because he's been an incredibly successful CEO, apart from this issue.
Yeah.
And, what I would say as well is that we were looking at Ericsson's share price a little bit earlier, and it's down at about 87, I think. I mean, it was...
83, I think, when I looked.
Right, 83. It was at that level in March 2020, yeah?
Yeah, so
it's well above...
at the moment. It's gone down since we started chatting. Maybe it was us.
It's well
except that we haven't broadcast this yet.
It's still well above where it was, when Ecom came in 2017, in early 2017. It's still well above that level.
If I go to like the 5-year thing,
are you going to have a look at it in January 2017 or December 2016?
Yeah, but it has dropped off a fucking fair bit.
It's dropped off a lot, but I still think it's about double what it was back then. Well, it's certainly maybe not double.
Not now. So October. Well, the trough was September 2017. It was at.
Okay, that first year was a
It was
difficult
at 45. So yeah, you're pretty much right.
So his first year in charge was difficult because he was obviously trying to get on top of stuff, and people were going,
This is
"Oh, is he
Kroner,
doing the
by the
right
way,
thing?"
pressure.
And it was down at 45. So it's well above where it was. You know, it's not like. Yeah, it's not good for it to have gone down
But
from 100 odd to.
I don't
below
think Boyer's going to look
90,
back on early 2022 with fondness.
Well, they just the interesting thing is what happened. I mean, like you make an interesting point about whether it's systemic and does this just keep happening? You know, can they root it out, or does it just become something that kind of drowns Ericsson eventually? And
I mean, imagine for the sake of argument, let's say something came up. Let's pick another random place in Venezuela or Philippines or whatever, where there's some more dodginess. Then you start joining the dots and go, well, hold on a sec. They've had it here, they've had it there. Is this a company culture problem?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, you know, we mentioned Open RAN earlier and everybody wanting to have more diversified sort of equipment supply chain and maybe even have vendors that are based in their own market and be a bit protectionist about it. All governments seem to like that idea, don't they? We hear the UK talking about that. The Americans obviously love it. You sort of wonder whether things like that add a bit of impetus and momentum to the whole sort of Open RAN drive, you know. I mean, things are going this way, it seems, in the world. We're going to talk about this, obviously, a bit with Ukraine, I think. But this whole... you know, not wanting to deal with companies that aren't, you know, from your own jurisdiction and you know, wanting everything to be closer to home, and it kind of plays into that narrative a little bit, I feel, some of this Iraq stuff. I don't think it helps them at all in terms of you know, especially because actually out of the two big Nordic vendors, they are the ones that are seen as being a little bit more resistant to Open RAN anyway. Have you just spilled beer on your laptop?
If you don't get any productivity out of me for the next week or so, I didn't spill beer. I just grabbed a beer out of the Yeti. Thanks again, Danielle, and just dribbled melted water all over my laptop. So that could get interesting if it starts fizzing and spitting. All right, let's move it on then. In fact, one of the reasons I grabbed a beer is because I thought I need another drink to talk about Ukraine because it's such a fucking massive topic. So what I want to do before we get into it, you know, this podcast is very tongue-in-cheek, very sort of light-hearted and chatty, but certain topics I think require a little bit of more sort of sincere framing before we move on and revert to our previous position. The thing about Ukraine, obviously, I don't need to recap, you know, what everyone sees on the news all the time. It's not the role of this pod to talk about that. But what interests me about it and what I think is an important bit of framing for us talking about it in a sort of telecoms and business context is the sort of moral absolutism of it. It's not very often... You know, I'm a big fan of nuance. I'm a big fan of grey areas. You know, I view nearly all topics as like a two-dimensional sort of spectrum, where you've got extreme positions at either side and the truth's normally somewhere in the middle. And useful discussions are normally arguing the toss about whether it's a bit to the left or a bit to the right or the centre, as opposed to arguing the toss about extreme position A versus extreme position B. Those are the unproductive conversations, in my opinion. That's why I don't really enjoy conventional party politics, you know, Conservative versus Labour. It's too binary.
Yeah.
But this is one of those cases where Russia, embodied by Putin, is the clear baddie in this situation. I don't think anyone's arguing. And look, there are nuances. For example, could US and its allies, US and NATO, have handled the situation prior to this better? And this goes all the way back. I mean, you can extrapolate it all the way back, certainly to the fall of the USSR. But then there's more recently, you know, bits of geopolitical fucking about that probably could have been done better or worse. But, you know, he's gone steaming in. The Ukrainians, there's no way that there's any moral or practical justification for what he did in the eyes of most people, including me. And so, but this creates this binary moral situation where Russia bad, Ukraine good. And the thing that slightly concerns me about that situation is then you get this cascade, this domino effect of other things, where if we accept that everything Russian is bad, then anything we do that's hostile to Russia is bad. And, you know, like in the story I wrote this week...
Wait, everything that's hostile to Russia is good, you mean?
Sorry, good, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Everything that's hostile to Russia is good because Russia is bad. And, you know, the story I wrote this week, they're like trivial examples, like the International Cat Federation's banning Russian-bred cats from their fucking cat shows. I mean, I didn't even know... Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know there were cat shows. And, you know that cliche about herding cats? It's not like Crufts where you can get them to jump through hoops, is it? So I don't know how cat shows work, other than people going, sit still, you little fucker.
Oh, wait, is it going to get to the stage where we can't buy Tolstoy and Waterstones or something?
Well, you mentioned Tolstoy. No, Tchaikovsky, I'm thinking of. Wales has banned Tchaikovsky.
They've banned
like
Tchaikovsky?
Yeah. Honestly, it's just...
I mean, who's
just
done
going
that?
crazy.
That's not that first minister of theirs, is it?
Did you see the...
No, I mean, it's a trivial thing. It's just one story. It's probably just one Welsh, outlet or whatever.
Did you see that Sainsbury renamed Chicken Kiev with Chicken Kyiv, to
Kyiv,
show
I know.
support? And then the memes on the internet was like, okay, that's it. Putin has had enough now.
Right, that is ridiculous, that sort of stuff.
Well, obviously,
I mean,
you've got the more trivial virtue signalling, if people want to put Ukrainian flag in their Twitter bio, then great, but it's not of great consequence one way or the other. You had a thing, and then it gets a little bit more malicious, like a Russian opera singer in the States got kicked out of whatever opera organisation she's part of for not denouncing Putin enough.
But she has family. It's tricky, yeah.
Well, it is tricky.
They probably,
Of course.
it's like there's probably thousands more who want to denounce who don't because they're scared.
Yeah.
The same way people didn't want to say they're voting for Trump because they were scared.
Exactly. So I understand the stampede, and on the whole, I'm in favour of these really unprecedented sanctions we've done, because we've had the whole chat about no-fly zones and to what extent we can get directly involved, and Russia's the other great nuclear power apart from the US in the world. It's just fucking dicey stuff. I mean, that happened on the I think the Sunday before my World Congress. I was getting news alerts going, Putin's put his nukes on high alert.
Yeah.
It was on the Sunday. Yeah.
It was on Sunday night.
Yeah, and everyone's like, Jesus Christ, this is serious.
He played that card really early.
He did play it early, but who knows whether he'll play it again? I mean, no one knows. It's a really weird.
What's the next step? Like a soft launch and then destroy?
Well, the next step potentially is to use...
Cancel?
This is what they're talking about at the moment, is false flag
nukes.
stuff.
Oh, false flag.
Where they try and make out that Ukraine's done something. So apparently what they're trying to do at the moment is suggest that Ukrainians have developed chemical weapons that they're going to use. And then it can justify the Russians coming out with some kind of chemical weapon attack themselves.
Yeah.
This is what
It's
the
from the
military
playbook,
intelligence
though.
thinks is
They
going
said
on.
that they always do this.
Yeah, well, that false flag thing.
Well, they did it in Syria.
Is known. I mean, I think he's been accused in some places where they've steamed into in the past of just blowing up Russian shit to set up a pretext.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's all I want to say. And we were lucky enough yesterday when the lovely Elena took us out to lunch, which is very kind of her. I tell you, a fucking pro move by Elena. She had to clear off to go to something at about 5, and as she was clearing off, she went, like Andrew was out with us, she went, do you want another round before I go? So she got in a round in that she wasn't even part of, which I think there's a little pro tip for UPR people out there. Always give them one more round. But one of the topics that we had, one of the things that we chatted about over lunch was this, and it's especially me and Iain chatting, and I thought it was a really useful dress rehearsal for us doing this pod, because there were some areas in which we didn't agree, but we thrashed it out. And you must never lose sight of the fact that if your conversational partner is someone that you respect and trust and like, that you must never let it get to a point where you're just like, well, you're just fucking talking shit now. You got to accept that this person's arguing in good faith. They just don't necessarily see things exactly the same way as you, which is fine. But a lot of people forget this stuff. They get a bit overheated. They get a bit caught up in the moment. Anyway, so we were able to do a little dress rehearsal. So I just wanted to say that before we get into it. And if you've got anything to add before we get into the more, well, then feel free, because I'm going to pass the ball to you in a sec.
Yeah.
But, my feeling about the whole Ukraine situation is it's awful. Putin's clearly the baddie. I've got no problem with that. But what we do, having established this consensus, this absolute consensus that Putin's the baddie, it creates the platform for some behaviour and some actions and some countermeasures that I'm not entirely comfortable with, that's all.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that doesn't change in any way that I think he's a baddie and that I support Ukraine and that I want it to all be over and I feel really bad for the Ukrainians and all the people getting fucked up by this. But that doesn't mean that it's carte blanche to do absolutely everything on the back of it, such as banning cats and shit.
We definitely
That's
don't
all
want to
I'm
ban
saying.
cats.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be happening.
So, you know, having
or Tchaikovsky.
or Tchaikovsky, yeah, or you know,
The
I mean,
Welsh
that's the-
need Tchaikovsky because they haven't got any decent composers of their own.
But you know what are you going to do? Ban Solzhenitsyn, who wrote in opposition to the regime that persecuted him. So it just gets incoherent. It's too blunt. It's too crude. Anyway, so having said that, there are lots of angles that are relevant to the sort of theme of this podcast. So I'll hand the ball over to you because you've been thinking about this week and you've written at least 1 or 2 stories on it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
why don't
started
you go
writing
with it?
about it actually at Mobile World Congress is interesting because there's always big stories going on that have got absolutely nothing to do with Mobile World Congress and that are telecom stories, and maybe even more so this year.
Yeah.
So Iraq was one of them, and the other one, which was equally geopolitical, was Ukraine.
Just
and,
a bit. It was a real
and Russia,
black cloud
it's
hanging
got
over
a
the
real
whole thing.
telecom angle to it because. One of the sanctions that you were talking about, you know, they've done things like trying to cut Russian banks off from the SWIFT system, and you know, and we've seen
Visa and MasterCard have
Visa
bailed.
and MasterCard,
Apparently, they owe 120 billions to Western banks.
right?
Is it?
Nice.
So there's the flip side.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Western banks go, oh, cheers.
And of course, telecom and tech is a part of this. So Biden's big sort of White House speech outlined a number of things, very, very, very similar actually on the tech side to what they did against Huawei when Trump was in charge, and they were trying to sort of cripple Huawei's ability to operate, which is basically deny US origin technologies to Russia. And as a consequence of that, one thing that you saw happen fairly quickly at Mobile World Congress was both Ericsson and Nokia stopping deliveries to Russian customers. And it's quite significant because I got some data from Deloro, which we always mention on the pod as kind of one of the market research companies that's worth paying attention to.
Yep.
And they were writing about it from a sort of broader perspective. What does this mean for the RAN market? Do we need to change our RAN forecast, sort of thing? And their conclusion is kind of no, because Russia's actually quite small. It's not like China. It's something like 1 to 2% of RAN spending is Russia.
Okay.
But it's still quite significant. The reason it's quite significant is Ericsson and Nokia are actually really big suppliers in Russia. I think they account for somewhere between 40 and 60% of the Russian RAN market.
And the rest will be Huawei and ZTE, would it?
And the rest, so the other two big suppliers are Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah.
So basically what it means is, I mean, I can't see a scenario. I mean, their statements on it, which I got from them, are both we've suspended deliveries. And I don't know what that means in terms, it would require some more digging to find out what that means in terms of what level of maintenance you're offering to current customers. You know, presumably they can't just say, we're having nothing to do with you anymore, you know, if you have any problems. There must be some contractual stuff there that's a worry for them.
Well, the contractual stuff I find is really interesting. Sorry, just to pick up on that, because you know, I'm a bit of a stickler for due process, and not because I'm obsessed with laws and regulations, but because I think due process is there to protect the little person, the individual.
Yeah.
The law, everyone should be equal under the law. And that's what due process is about. And now suddenly contract law, such is the overwhelming consensus against Russia that normal contract law is being suspended.
I think this is why some of the software companies have not been that. So I got in touch with a company called Amdocs, BSS, OSS. It's sort of back-end IT systems, very, very important.
You wrote this up, didn't you? You wrote a story about this.
I did. I mean, it was a bit of a sort of
this is one of the things we were chatting about yesterday.
Journalism thing, I suppose.
No, it wasn't. I don't. You know, for the record, to recap on our chat yesterday, all I wanted to bring up. So you wrote a story, basically sort of
the
commenting on the fact that they haven't said anything.
Amdocs declines to announce Russia sanctions.
Yeah, and all I said was at the time, and you know, I hope you realise I meant it constructively and as a mate and as someone who totally unconditionally respects you as a journalist. I was just like, okay, why did you go there?
Yeah.
So you know, that's
I mean, the story itself's quite. The headline's more gotcha, but the story's quite nuanced, I think, because it does point out a lot of this stuff. And I think the thing for Amdocs, I mean, Amdocs, I should say, they list all of their customers that they can in their SEC filings, their filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's a really long list. Mm-hmm. But there's 4 names that jump out: MTS, Rostelecom, Vion, which are all Russian companies, and then Kyivstar, which is Ukrainian,
which is owned by Vion,
owned by Vion.
Yeah,
and it puts them in a bit of an awkward situation, obviously, that in itself. Yeah. But I think as a software company as well, SAP,
and they're Israel based.
They're Israel based,
so they might geographically find it naturally easier to work with Russia because they're not that far away.
Yeah, and apparently I've also read actually Israel's government is trying to be sort of an intermediary on this. I'd read somewhere trying
In
to
the
sort
whole
of play a more
aggro.
intermediary role, which is also interesting.
Well, they're a regional superpower, Israel.
I just think
they're small by land area, but they're a regional superpower. There's no doubt about that.
I think they wouldn't want to. Some companies wouldn't want to rush to. There's been this thing recently with companies like McDonald's and Starbucks closing down stores, and that's clearly not to do with. I don't think that's to do with sanctions. This is to do with corporate reputation.
Yes,
they realise if they can't sell burgers in Finland and the UK because people go, they're selling burgers to the Russians.
Cascade.
Yeah,
it's that
I
domino
also
effect.
wonder if they stopped because they couldn't get paid because the ruble is worth nothing.
That could
well,
be a
there
reason.
could be that as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think that's something Amdocs has to worry about. I think for Amdocs, what they would do is look at the sanctions, and it's probably a lot clearer for Ericsson and Nokia, where there's semiconductors, there's hardware that goes into stuff they're providing, that's US origin, and therefore it completely rules them out of providing this, and they can refer back to, when they're trying to explain to customers why they've had to do this, they can say, well, look, unfortunately our hands are tied, we have to comply with US sanctions. For a company like Amdocs doing software, and software is mentioned in Biden's statement, but I think it's a bit hazier what you can and cannot provide. They want to be absolutely sure they're not in breach of commercial contracts,
Yeah, so they're kind of in a bind.
Yeah,
because they don't want to piss off the
I don't know if you
Yanks.
saw SAP's statement. SAP,
No, I
the
didn't.
big German company.
Tell us.
So SAP came out with a very quick. Their CEO Klein came out with this published statement on the website fairly soon after all this kicked off, saying we are stopping all business in Russia.
End of.
2 days later, it got modified. We will carry
Except
on
for this
supporting customers that we already have deals with, but we won't be supplying any new products to them. And obviously what's happened is a load of his Russian customers have just got in touch and gone with their lawyers going, hang on a minute, we've bought this stuff, you can't just flick a kill
just
switch.
fucking bail.
Actually, was this in Dannon as well? Dannon,
Well, that's what I mean by due
Right.
process.
Dannon was like, no, we're good. We'll stay.
Yeah. But
Danone.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the whole RAN stuff, which has been the focus of the things I've been writing, I find it interesting geopolitically because I can't see an easy way for Ericsson and Nokia to sort of resume business in the same way that they've done in the past in Russia. Not just because of the sanctions thing, but I actually think from a sort of corporate reputation perspective now, I think it would be just very hard for them to sort of justify going back in and starting things up again. They're big companies. They're a lot more well-known than Amdocs.
It's just easier to bail on the whole thing.
And therefore, what you can sort of see happening...
Especially Ericsson. Jesus Christ. They must be so desperate to not get a news scandal associated with them.
You can see Russia sort of falling into the Chinese orbit even more on the sort of telecom side of things.
Right.
And then you have this situation where the Russian operators, MTS... Megafon's the other big one, I think, Vion, and you've got Tele2 there, and then some smaller ones. They're basically wholly dependent on Huawei and ZTE to a lesser extent, which is what operators don't want to be. I mean, this whole single supplier stuff that we hear talked about in the industry all the time, we don't want to be dependent on one supplier. Open RAN's all about this, diversification and having other options. All of a sudden, because of geopolitics and because of what's happened, they're dependent on these companies. I mean, potentially in the future, they have to swap out kit that they've got from Ericsson and Nokia and bring in...
Yeah, so there's the extra nuance. So there's basically three things that someone who's shitting themselves about getting in trouble for not being openly hostile to Russia enough can do. The first is the easy one, where they stop selling stuff to them now.
Yeah.
What they can't do, presumably by contract law, unless we decide to suspend all fucking law, is if they've got a bit of paper that says, we will do this, they can't just go, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But then the third bit is that sort of maintenance side, which I think you were just alluding to now, where they've got Ericsson kit and there will be a sort of a service contract and all that sort of thing. Do you need another beer, mate? He's doing well, Pierre, by his standards.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
He's even coming for one after.
But presumably they can't sort of, for instance, sell new 5G stuff to them,
Well, exactly, but there's that little grey area in between, which is servicing what they've already got, and there's presumably service level agreements about all that.
Could they go and point to the government and say, well, sorry, but the government said this?
I think they
I think that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's what they have to do. I mean, if you're an operator and you need a replacement radio unit from Ericsson, now in the past you just go to Ericsson and go, we need a new radio unit, and you get it, and you've already got your baseband there, and it'll work with it. presumably now it's going to be very difficult for them to do that.
Ericsson won't even pick up the phone. They'll be like, fuck
and
off,
therefore,
mate, I don't need this
they
shit.
need to swap that out, but they also need to swap out the baseband because they need Open RAN. They need the whole thing to work together. There's no Open RAN.
Can they tell the lawyers fuck off because? Oh, sorry, the government said so.
Yes, they could.
Yeah,
in principle. But even that's you see, this is another thing that Iain and I chatted about yesterday. And I'll invite you in a sec to talk about the story you published today about Huawei. But like one of the big digs we have at Huawei is that they're alleged to be too intimate with the Chinese government. Well, right now, governments are telling private companies what to do, fucking left, right, and centre. So, not exactly, but a similar degree of sort of synergy of coexistence between public and private is happening now in the name of cutting off Russia, which again I'll stress.
But the government didn't force these companies to stop doing business.
Well, I think
Ericsson's
close to force.
Ericsson and Nokia would probably have been forced by US sanctions to stop it. Companies like McDonald's is different. They're doing it because they don't want the reputational problems.
But who knows what chats they're having behind the scenes?
Well, that's true. I don't know.
To be completely neutral, McDonald's said something like, because for the future they want to be like, we want to be able to come back. So they said something like, we couldn't basically maintain supply or something. Like they didn't really say we're stopping because of what you guys are doing. They just said.
Right.
So can I give you an example of a story I wrote at the start of this week? The headline was Telecoms industry walks a tightrope over Ukraine. But actually the most interesting thing about this story wasn't the telecoms part as far as I'm concerned. It was Visa and MasterCard. And I mentioned the cats and all that just to make my point about how it's all getting a bit silly already. But then I said, on a more serious note, I'm just reading verbatim from what I wrote. On a more serious note, the sanctions domino effect is by far the strongest illustration of the control the US has over much of the global economy. Visa and MasterCard, which hold a near duopoly in payment systems in many countries, pulled the plug on Russia after a call, which I hyperlinked to a story, after a call between Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is now this unconditional fucking Luke Skywalker figure, which he may or may not be, but again, just back to this binary, this moral binary, between Ukrainian President Zelensky and US lawmakers. I think he got in touch with Congress or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, I can't prove it. I can just talk about the coincidence. According to this story that I linked to, let's see who wrote that story up. Associated Press, so that's just some bullshit crazy site. Associated Press wrote a story. What was their headline? MasterCard, Visa suspend operations after Russia invasion, but then they go in to talk about how they suspended their operations within minutes of a phone call from Zelensky to US politicians. So the point I'm trying to make is there is now this direct link between politics and business, which is exactly what we give Huawei and China a hard time for. Now, I know they're different. I know they're different circumstances. I know when the allegations against Huawei were made in sort of more peacetime, less fraught circumstances. I'm just not comfortable with any time. And just like if I've said it loads of times on the pod, if someone had proven that Huawei was acting at the behest of the Chinese government, I would happily call them out on it.
Yeah.
I think it's just we need to do everything we can to put the squeeze on the Russian government to stop what they're doing.
That's my problem. Everything. Where does it stop?
Yeah, it's terrible for the average Russian person who probably doesn't even want a war. But
just coming back to the flip side of that, Ericsson, Nokia, halting deliveries, and the Chinese companies not halting deliveries.
Right. So this is a story you just wrote.
So whatever your position on it, this is kind of what's happening. Is that Huawei has not halted deliveries basically, and that's already kind of blowing up for them. So this week there was a story about a couple of non-executive directors in the UK bailing out. There were reports a few days ago about how Huawei's apparently, because Russia's internet has come under massive attack from hackers.
Ukraine's or Russia's?
Apparently Putin wanted to unplug it.
Hackers Anonymous, these anonymous groups.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And apparently the reports are that the company that's come in to sort of stop the hackers and fight against them and defend Putin's internet is Huawei. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but certainly Huawei has not said it will go along with what Ericsson and Nokia are doing. And now it's not obviously going to be, because it's already subject to US sanctions in terms of what equipment it can get. It's using Chinese components and all this kind of stuff. There's no business reasons for it to not carry on selling products to MTS. It probably sees an opportunity there to win some business in the future, from a commercial perspective. I think reputation-wise in the West, obviously, it's kind of... It's not going... I mean, it wasn't just those two UK guys. Lewandowski, the Polish footballer who plays for Bayern Munich, he's torn up an agreement. He's torn up a commercial agreement he's got with Huawei because of all this as well.
It's very fraught.
It's very... and I think whatever you think about it, whatever your position is on the rights and wrongs of the sort of stuff you've just been talking about, it makes it look, because they've sort of aligned themselves with the position the Chinese government takes, it's obviously ammunition for US critics of theirs who've always said they're in lockstep with the Chinese government, and look, isn't this evidence of that they're just carrying on going on? And I think the point of my story today is I think this is quite an awkward one. The spillover effect now is because of people see people like Lewandowski saying, well, I don't want anything to do with Huawei anymore because they're propping up Russia's internet.
Well, you get this guilt by association cascade
entirely, and this is why companies like Deutsche Telekom and Telecom Italia and Vodafone, which spend huge amounts of money with Huawei still, despite all the backlash.
This could be the final thing that makes them cut off from the whole of Western Europe.
It's a very awkward one for them. And I went around and asked them yesterday. So I asked Vodafone, Orange, Telecom Italia, Telefonica, what's the other one?
Deutsche Telekom.
Yeah. What will they? Are they reassessing their relationship with Huawei in light of what's going on?
And they were like,
They pretty much, with the exception of Vodafone, who just didn't respond. Vodafone Group, come on, do better than
sort
that.
It out.
The rest of them all said they'd come back with comments, and then I had Telefonica later say we don't want to comment on this, and the others haven't, and it's obviously something they don't really want to be dealing with at the moment. But it's a nasty one for them to deal. It could be.
It is nasty.
It could be.
I do have sympathy for their comms people on this.
It could be the thing that sort of scuppers Huawei's relationships with European customers.
It could be, and the broader topic there, we're probably going to have to wrap it up soon. Well, we've done at least an hour and a half, haven't we, Pierre? Yeah.
Almost.
But, it's a good topic, so I won't artificially end it, but we're getting towards the end. We've spoken loads of times before the Ukraine thing kicked off, about balkanisation and the end of globalisation. Yeah. And that was normally born of less dramatic aggro between the US and China, like those sanctions that they did there seemed like a fucking drop in the ocean.
Russia was like, hey, don't forget about us.
Do you know what I mean? Oh, you think you got sanctions problems? Check this out. But that was already, we were talking about people retrenching, them sort of bribing TSMC to build fabs in Texas and in Germany and all that sort of thing. And it could still, that's the other thing people worry about. Even the amateur sort of people who view geopolitical stuff like a game of Risk are thinking, well, this probably wouldn't be a bad time if China fancied having a pop at Taiwan.
Yeah, well, everyone's looking the other way.
For them to roll the dice.
Oh, no, they're waiting to see how this plays out.
Apparently, there's more sort of optimistic talk on that, on the Taiwan front, because China's starting to look at this and worry about what could be the impact.
The sanctions.
Yeah, totally. They're thinking, sanctions can be that sweeping. Then
you could be 100% sure that all the Western governments are already like, well, let's get ahead of this and prepare sanctions for China already.
Well, I'll tell you, there's an interesting thing, actually. So moving back, we've done enough telecom stuff that I feel we haven't just been completely self-indulgent.
There's only like 50 listeners at this point.
Talking about the new... But, so we've seen the sanctions, and they've been massive and unprecedented. They're also leading to all sorts of problems for the West, especially on the lines of energy. Yeah. And gas and oil and all that shit. That's having knock-on effects to all these green agendas. Suddenly they're like, do you know what, maybe we'll do green in a couple of decades because we've got more important shit to think about right now. But our exposure to Russia economically is tiny compared to our exposure to China. So in terms of sanctions, if if something equivalent happened, like China decided to steam into Taiwan, and we tried the same sanctions, they'd be incredibly painful for us as well. They'd be very painful for China.
Yeah.
Imagine just like the iPhone alone. I know it's stupid to think about just a device, but holy shit.
Well, what we've got... Well, so I think your point's
oh my god,
correct.
Tim Cook will be on the first plane.
Do you know what I mean?
Don't.
Over there. I think you're right, Pierre, in that the Chinese are probably looking at this and thinking, oh shit, these people who we thought might... Because I think... And I've chatted to my dad about this, and my dad, used to be in like MI6 and as a historian and knows his shit. And we were chatting about this whole thing, like, why did Putin do this? Because this has been the most baffling thing. Like a week or two ago, when it first happened, everyone was like, what?
I know.
I thought there'd be a bit more saber rattling, a bit more fucking about. Maybe he grabbed those little bits of that eastern Ukraine and all that sort of thing. Donbass, yeah. But no one thought he'd just steam in, did they?
No.
And we concluded, and I've heard other people talk about this, and I'm quite comfortable with this as a conclusion, that he thought he could go for a decapitation strategy, where either he would get hold of, what's his name again? I keep forgetting his name. Zelensky? Yeah.
Volodymyr. So everyone is... Vladimir, bad. Volodymyr.
Volodymyr Zelensky, with 2 Ys. I don't know why he needs that extra Y. That's just showing off. That's your keys. But I think he thought he'd either get hold of... Like, he's been sending these like SAS-type teams off him, but they haven't got hold of him, or he'd just leg it.
Well, it might happen yet.
No,
it might happen yet. But no, but I think he was counting on this very early, like a week or two ago, this decapitation strategy whereby Ukraine would just go, oh, fuck it, we give up. And now that it hasn't happened, it's turned into this sort of more attritional, conventional war that is obviously catastrophic for everyone involved. Not least, by the way, the Russian soldiers. I reckon most of them are just like, what the fuck are we doing here?
Yeah.
What was the reason I brought that? What were we talking about before?
Taiwan is probably looking at this, and Taiwan did say we'll fight
China
to the bitter end, and China is like, maybe they will actually,
Oh yeah, well, and there's the fact that Taiwan's like about 100 miles off the coast of China,
and the
boats don't travel very fast.
It's obviously way smaller, but
anyway, long and short of it is, Putin seems to have rolled the dice, and it doesn't seem to have worked. No one doubts that he has the military might to eventually conquer Ukraine, but I think he was counting on it being a quick, neat little... We'll have that. And that's why I brought it up. I think he was also counting on, if he did succeed at that the West would just sort of do a Munich.
Slap a hand.
Yeah. Like, in Munich, just to remind everyone of the Second World War history, is when Neville Chamberlain, among others, when Hitler invaded Sudetenland, which is Western Czechoslovakia, they sort of went, oh, all right then. Yeah. You can have that, but fucking
anymore. Yeah.
Leave it there. And of course, history says that was appeasement, and that just emboldened him to pile into Poland or whatever it is he did. And I think they were probably thinking that
we'll tiptoe into
this is what the West would do. We just go, all right, then you can have Eastern Ukraine, but that's it now. No more of this. And I think China might have thought that. That's why I brought it up. China might have thought that. And I think what we've shown, reluctantly, I think they were right to perceive us as weak. But we've shown that eventually we do have a red line and we can front up. And that's back to your point, Pierre, about China thinking, oh, yeah.
Apparently there's a rumor that at the Olympics, obviously Putin was the guest, massive guest there. There's a rumor. I mean, it's like a conspiracy. I don't know. But it makes sense that he would have told Xi Jinping, by the way, we're moving in. And then Xi Jinping would have asked, "Oh, can you wait until the end of the Olympics?" Yeah. But then China denies that. But then China must have thought, "Hey guys, he's going in. Let's see how this goes." Because if you fail, well, then we'll know.
Yeah.
But you be the guinea pig of this.
I'm happy with it not being coincidence that the invasion happened within days of the Winter Olympics.
I think it was the next day after it ended. Pretty much, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily think Xi Jinping. I mean, all this speculation, we don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think he's necessarily going, go on, mate, fucking get stuck in. But he was probably going, look, if you don't want to damage our relationship, don't take away from my little prestige event that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, that's that, really. I mean, on the business and telecom side, I think we can agree that it's accelerated the balkanization and the deglobalization that we've spoken about before. There's going to be the cost of living is going to go up. We're all going to be paying loads more for our energy.
Fuck.
We're all just going to be skint.
And eventually for our telecom products.
Yeah.
I read that wheat is going to go massively up. So
Because they're a massive
get past
wheat
it now when
exporter.
you can.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a weird
Luckily,
thing.
I'm off the bread these
only
days.
Ukraine can
Doesn't
do
agree with me.
wheat.
You what?
It seems like a weird thing that Ukraine's so critical for wheat.
Well, not just Ukraine, but Russia as well.
And ironically,
Yeah,
they
what
have
was
so
that?
much gas there in Ukraine
Yeah.
that they can sell us.
So there's that. There's a power implication. I take your point about how I think they're in a bind, because back to that my whole thing about to what extent a given private enterprise is in league with a government. And if the Chinese government's position is like, we're going to sit on the fence on this, or perhaps even tacitly, they've got some government Twitter accounts that are basically been quite belligerent against the West on this. They're going, well, you fucking brought it on yourself or whatever.
Yeah.
No, but did you see so recently Xi Jinping and Putin had this big thing where they signed a document that said we're best buddies now, right? When was this? A few months ago, last year?
Probably. I don't know specifically what we're talking about. But it sounds like
then
the
they
sort of
had
thing
this
might have done.
vote at the UN, and then everyone
They
was
abstained.
Yeah, they were like, holy shit,
Rather
they
than-
abstained.
Yeah. So they're sitting on the fence. They're sitting on the fence.
they
I
were
mean,
surprised.
abstaining. Bear in mind the UN is whatever 100 countries or 50 countries, whatever. I think about 90% of them condemned it. Russia obviously didn't, and one or two other places.
I think it was
like
only
Venezuela.
6 or 7 countries didn't said against.
Yeah, one or two places that
Venezuela,
are just like
Eritrea.
Eritrea. Yeah. Well, I tell you, there's another interesting thing about more global geopolitics as it impinges on business. Is and this comes back to the moral binary thing again. So until recently, Venezuela baddies, yeah, and Pierre, I know you know more than most of us about Venezuela because you got a family there. Iran were baddies. Thing is, Venezuela and Iran both got quite a nice lot of fossil fuels. So now that we've decided that Russia are the ultimate baddies, Russia are the fucking emperor in Star Wars, then maybe, and you can see, I've seen it, read it in the news, there's a bit of a repositioning. Maybe Venezuela and Iran aren't so bad after all, bless them.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes.
But ironically, though, Venezuela is super in cahoot with Russia.
Yeah.
All these fossil fuels all belong to sort of baddies, don't they? Except for Norway.
They do a bit. Well, actually, US is all right for fossil fuels by itself.
It is.
The
That's
empire is called OPEC.
Yes. Well, there we go. That's not too subtle, is it? Actually, talking about OPEC, so there's another one, that we were talking about yesterday. Saudi Arabia's been involved in the war against Yemen for ages, but we don't get the same, and I'm not saying they're equivalent, there's all sorts of nuances, there's all sorts of unique circumstances, but we don't get the same goody-baddie narrative about Saudi Arabia versus Yemen as we do Russia versus Ukraine. Anyway, I'm not going to labour that point. I've made it. I still think this is a fairly clear-cut thing, and I hope that Russia fails in its invasion, and I hope that there will
It's
soon come a
already
time.
failed, pretty much. So.
Well, it's stalled, but they
like they said, they're likely they'll be occupying, but then they'll be basically defending for
insurgency.
years.
Yeah, insurgency, all that stuff.
Sucks.
But the worst thing about insurgency is that just leads to more bloodshed
Yeah.
of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians.
Do you know, I
of
can't
Russian
believe
soldiers.
I went to Kiev in 2012.
Dude, I've never been there.
Unbelievable.
Right.
I was there 2 years
What's it
before.
like?
A bit grim, a bit
A bit Russian,
a bit Russian,
a bit
yeah.
post-Soviet,
Yeah, exactly.
Right. a bit
Nice
like our old
people,
office
though.
in Maple House.
Yeah.
Right, cool. Well, I think we've done that, and we've certainly done over an hour and a half, haven't we? So I'll wrap it up there. But that was a great chat. Great to be back in our studio. And thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.